Добрый день, дорогие зрители.
Hello, dear audience. I'm the chief editor of Strelka magazine, and today we'll be talking about walking around the city, how to make us, the citizens, to walk more. It's an open secret that to maintain good health, one needs to walk at least 2.5 hours every day. And response to this could be city planning, the way cities are organized, how big is the pavement, and there are companies who provide advice to the towns as to how to make city more adaptable for the pedestrians. And today with me is Bronwen, Thornton, the founder of Walk21. This company has been providing recommendations to towns and helping them to make such master plans in order to account for the interest of pedestrians, to increase the areas where people could walk. And we will discuss today what challenges the company sees for the towns, how to improve urban infrastructure, what trends in this area exist. Bronwen, the floor is yours. I'm happy to welcome you. I will be very happy to listen to your presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you indeed for the invitation to speak to the Moscow Urban Forum. I am very disappointed not to be joining you in person. I've enjoyed very much looking at the streets of Moscow from my desk here in the UK. And I'm inspired by what I see. So I'm sorry not to be enjoying walking around your streets. Next slide, please. So just by way of introduction, I actually can't see my slide, so I'm going to trust that you have the second slide up. The title of my slide is Walking Around the City, How to Support 10,000 Steps a Day in a Megacity. Great. Thank you so much. That's excellent. I can see that now. So let me tell you first a little bit about Walk21, who we are and what we do, and then we can talk about walking in a megacity. So next slide, please. At Walk21, we were formed in the year 2000, and we started as a conference series, and the ball rolled from there, and we've had a conference ever since, international conference in lots of different countries, and expanded as the walking movement and the demand and attention on walking has expanded, and we represent walking on the global stage. So we work with World Health Organization, UN Environment, UN Habitat, and we work with them on some of these global agendas, as well as the conference series. And we work with cities to improve. We've been working with the city of Hong Kong, where they already walk a lot, to look at how we can improve the walkability in Hong Kong. And we seek to engage stronger political commitment with the International Charter for Walking, as well as better citizen input to how our streets are designed through our walkability app. And we run training, we have resources and a network, and a knowledge library from all those conferences all these years. So we welcome you to come and explore the Walk21 website and find some of these resources and stay in touch with us through the network. So next slide, please. Let's talk about what is walkability. Like everyone talks about, we need to be able to walk, and in many places in the world, people walk because they don't have a choice. So people haven't created beautiful walking environments, they walk out of necessity. But what is walkability? And we use this definition at the moment, albeit there is always discussion about what that means. And the critical elements in this definition is walkability is the extent to which the built environment supports and encourages walking, not just is a space where people can walk, but it actually encourages people walking by providing for comfort and safety. And then the critical other element here is within a reasonable time and effort. How reasonable is it to ask people, how far should we expect them to walk? We just had another call where we were talking about, oh, it's too hot, it's too wet, it's too cold. Well, everyone always has a reason about what effort is required, it's too hilly. And so this is what we need to think about when we're imagining and enabling people to walk in our communities. And the last elements in that definition is offering visual interest in journeys throughout the network. And when we're talking about asking people to walk 10,000 steps a day in a mega city, we have to be thinking also about that visual interest to make it enjoyable. Next slide, please. So what is a walkable city? A walkable city is a city that supports all these people that walking already and invites more short distances to be walked by people who have a choice to motorize. The research shows that people will actually choose alternative modes of travel if walking is not cared for, is not valued, is not provided for. And what is walkable at a city scale when we're thinking about a megacity? Because walking is a local short distance experience, and it's been undervalued because it's a local short distance experience, because our transport systems has veered towards longer distances, bigger systems. People love to design highways and build bridges and big complex metro systems. But these systems, they all need walking to thrive at the local level. And this is what I want to talk about more as we go. And I've talked already about the necessity, but when you start looking at cities where people have to walk, it's not just in poorer countries, but some of the growing cities in Asia, the Hong Kongs and Singapores, are recognizing it's critical to underpin their other transport systems with really good walking environments, because they can't afford for people not to walk, not to access their public transport or to operate locally. So we need to think about how we support walking in our cities. How do we manage it, encourage it, and make it as safe and as attractive as possible? Next slide, please. So let's touch quickly on the 10,000 steps a day idea. And this is the World Health Organization's, this is sort of the headline, how much do we need to walk? And I know whenever people put on pedometers, they suddenly start pacing around the office to try and get their the number of steps that they've taken that day higher up. But at a city perspective, we can build in those steps without people even realizing it, because the research shows that neighborhoods that support walking, neighborhoods that are activity friendly, induce more walking and increase people's physical activity levels by 48 to 89 minutes per week. And the critical factors that we know that make this difference is residential density, the number of public transport stops that people can access, the number of street intersections, so that's the permeability of the urban environment, and the number of parks within walking distance of people's homes. These are the things that enable people to choose to walk and to increase the value of that effort in the health of their environments. And what's also interesting with walking is that the investment in walking and cycling as well, environments, has been identified by the World Health Organization as a critical factor for improving global physical activity and thus our general health and well-being, including our mental health. So building in walkability, creating active neighborhoods is a critical part of that. So let me touch, next slide please. Let me touch on this idea in the megacity, because people always say it's too far to walk, I've got too much to carry, I've got too many things to do. But when you look at a walking journey, if you invite people to walk from their front door and you see that public transport is a journey extender, so they've walked to the public transport, they've taken public transport, and then they walk at the other end of that, and we measure those different journeys, then we enable people to have walking as their primary mode, even in a long distance city like a megacity like in Moscow. And I'll come to the public transport later in my slides, but I picked up the quote on this slide from a website talking about the expat experience in Moscow, and they all talked about how much they both loved the walking around the city, but also how much they found the city was incredibly accessible due to the metro that Moscow has. And what's also interesting with the metro, you're famous for how beautiful your stations are. And I find that so inspiring, because if we want people to feel valued, like, think about how luxurious and beautiful cars are these days. Think about how we've invested in highways. And this is the same style of investment in our public transport systems. And investing in that on our streets communicates the same sense of value and priority to people on foot. And you're doing that in Moscow, and you have that infrastructure there already. So let's talk about, from a Walk 21 perspective, next slide please, our vision for a walkable city. And we have captured this in three core elements. The first one is that it's really important to retain the people who are walking already. It's critical that we protect them in terms of their road safety from any dangers on the street. And the final one that is essential is that we enable people to walk more by improving their accessibility and their comfort. Next slide, please. So retaining people walking is a critical factor, and this requires understanding how many people are walking already, because usually more people walking or less people walking is not recognized within statistics because we're not measuring and counting people correctly. So it's really critical that we measure those short journeys, those local journeys, as well as longer distance commutes and other types of travel in our cities. And so once we start understanding those shorter journeys and we can provide for those as well as the longer journeys, we can value them. And this builds the conversation and communicates a priority for people to choose to walk from their front door. Next slide, please. A critical factor in retaining people walking is road safety. Now, the UN last year passed a resolution which said that, building on the Stockholm Declaration, that they were going to support mode shift to more walking and cycling as a road safety measure. And this is what comes from a safe systems approach. We build an environment that is safe for walking and safe for cycling. This improves road safety for everybody. And it's a really critical difference between thinking that all we are doing is putting up barriers between motorization and walking and cycling, but actually taking the whole street and saying this whole environment needs to be a safe space for everybody that's moving within it. Now, and one of the critical dimensions of doing that is infrastructure and safe crossing points, but it's also managing vehicle speeds. And I found some stats from the World Health Organization looking at, I'm afraid these are for Russia altogether, not for Moscow, but I couldn't drill down any further than this at the moment. But if we do nothing else to improve the walking safety in our cities, then reducing vehicle speeds is a really critical one. And we see in the US that pedestrian deaths are actually increasing at the moment due to speed and the nature of the vehicles that people are driving. So the challenges are there, but we do know what the solutions and opportunities are. And the third dimension of building a walkable city, next slide please, is enabling people to walk. And I see from my touring around Moscow online is that since, well, basically the last 10 years, the last decade, the city has been investing in its urban context and building parks and green zones and improving streets and giving priority to pedestrians in lots and lots of places. And it's really, really inspiring to see, because if we don't enable people to choose to walk, and not just in shopping districts and downtowns and riverfronts, but enabling children to walk to school, enabling older people to access the community, it keeps us all on our feet throughout the stages of our life journey. Next slide, please. So to really build on this walkable city concept and actually sustain and manage this process, it's not just about rebuilding our streets, albeit that is a critical thing, but what is the data needs? What do we need to know to understand how walking is working in our city? And at Walk 21, we've been looking at this issue on a global level and looking at the key performance indicators and the opportunities. And one of the things that people say to us is, there's not enough data for walking. We don't understand it, we don't know it. It's still this lament. So what we decided to do was to look at what was available in existing databases against those key performance indicators. And we're building a project at the moment, which I'll come back to in a minute, which is actually looking at how we look at all of the, bring a whole lot of different data sets together about walking. But these 6 questions seem to us the critical questions to help us best manage our environments for people walking. How much are they walking? Is it safe? Are they within walking distance of public transport? Is it comfortable? Is there policy and good governance to support walking? And how satisfied are people with that experience? What's your user test situation here? Very quickly, I'm just going to talk briefly about those. So next slide, please. The activity is the average minutes walked for transport per day. This gives you your physical activity benefit as like that your 10,000 steps measure. We know that you're getting enough physical activity, and that means we have to measure all the little short journeys on either side of other trips, because whenever we get out of our other motorized modes, we are walking again. And then when we break that activity down and understand gender differences in how we move in our cities, ability differences, age differences, and even income differences, it helps us target our programs even better. Next slide, please. The safety question. What is the number of people killed and seriously injured on our streets? What's the number of crashes that involve pedestrian? And what's the risk relative to their exposure? It's great. We need to understand this data because safety is a critical factor why people would choose not to walk because of fear of motorized traffic. Next slide, please, which is accessibility. And Sustainable Development Goal 11.2 identifies that we want to have people living within 500 meters of public transport stops. And these are called commuter catchments, and the percentage of people living within 500 meters of public transport illustrates a degree of access to the rest of the city. From a walking perspective, we would like to think that people live, you will have heard about 15-minute cities, but around 500 meters around all of our key destinations that we would want to access as pedestrians should be highly walking friendly. And you'll see in this diagram, not only is it public transport hubs, but it's also sports and leisure facilities. We've talked about the importance of access to green space already, access to shops, healthcare, school sites, education. Our children should be walking to school and developing both their physical activity and their independence. And finally, employment. And even if it's not that people travel to work by foot, but the opportunity to go out from work and go for a walk as part of a meeting. And I'd just like to come back, next slide please, to the issue around accessibility to public transport, and a great illustration from Washington, D.C., where they analyzed, this is a very low density suburban city that has a metro system designed to bring people from those suburbs into the middle of Washington, D.C. And they were struggling with their ridership levels, with the quality of their service. And they analyzed every station and identified that their best investment to improve the level of service that their metro service offered was to identify the walkable catchments around every station. And they analyzed it against an 11-point criteria. And you can see in this diagram here, what this illustrates is that within that walkable catchment zone, you see lots of wasteland, and you see lots of disconnected housing estates that could be connected to the station, which is in that yellow dot in the middle. And what they discovered was it's very small critical pieces of infrastructure. They could connect whole estates to that public transport hub. And they did the math, which showed that for every 10 houses they connected to the station, increased their ridership by 7 trips per week. But the other thing that safe access to their public transport system did was reduce their transit costs for people with disabilities. So instead of sending them cars and driving them around, people could access their trains and move around the city in that way. Next slide, please. And this to me is one of my favorite slides when I saw this presented, and we work very closely with Helgi now about this. And this to me is the key to understanding how we should be thinking about our public transport systems, because any public transport journey is two walking journeys. It's the journey to the stop and it's the journey after the stop. But because we segment things, and historically our main mode was the motorized mode, the only thing that would get recorded in transport management statistics was the bus journey or the train journey in between. And what Helgi's work illustrates so beautifully, and he's continuing to do this work, and I really recommend you follow up on the stuff that he's doing now, is that when you actually analyze the journey from origin to destination, that most of the time, when you ask people what they remember about their journey, the resonance, the thing that they report back on is the experience of walking, not the experience on the bus, but they comment on the journey to and from the bus stations. And up to half the journey time can be spent walking. And how do they get to public transport? Well, as you can see there, over 80% of people access their public transport journeys on foot. So when we are building public transport systems, we must be building the walking journeys into those public transport. And the research shows that people who catch public transport do have higher physical activity levels than others. Next slide, please. And this is the comfort factor. Are we creating environments where people feel comfortable is the traffic managed. Now, this I think is from Paris. This is not a motorized zone, but it captures some of the elements. And what was so exciting, there was space to walk, it's safe to cross the road, and vehicles are moving at the right speed. Next slide, please. Is that I found that Moscow is doing this already. This fantastic map. I spent so long looking at these before and after pictures. We all love a before and after. It doesn't matter what the subject is. And the transformation that is happening on these streets, from being car corridors to being public space where people can walk and enjoy. And we've been doing some work looking at young children who can't walk on their own but with carers. And the impact on the opportunity to be out and in public space like this is critical to the development of their brains, not just their legs, but to their mental capacities as well. And so this project, which has been improving the comfort of Moscow streets, is really fantastic to see, and I've really enjoyed looking at that because it's a critical dimension. Just coming now to the next slide, please. The fifth thing that is important to have in place is policies. And this is our mapping of global policies. Where are the policies? Where are people implementing policies? And as you can see on here, almost most places have some dimension in which they are managing policies for walking. Next slide, please. And the final thing is the satisfaction, the feedback loop from your community. Are people enjoying the walking experience? Where can we identify the greatest need for the next interventions? And we are developing an app. It's called the Walkability app. It's not complicated. And we're trialing this in Dublin in September, but many other places around the world, Norway, Indonesia, Portugal, Spain, Italy, the Philippines, to get that user feedback and to find those opportunities. And just the next slide, please, where you can't go out with the app, like in Medellin, Colombia, the children went out with these lollipops to flag up where they liked walking or not. And just quickly now for my last slides, next slide please, what COVID showed us with walking and walkability in our cities is that when you stop all the traffic movement, people come out and walk. But the cities that really took the opportunity that COVID presented had walking already on their plans. They had ideas and opportunities in place. And so those cities could roll out very quickly with new interventions and new improvements. But what's critical now is to embed the learnings that we got from COVID about how to build these resilient cities, how to encourage our communities to stay on their feet, is by embedding good governance. And this is why we run what's called the 8 Steps to Walkable Cities program, to embed that into the policies and practices so that we never go backwards from those opportunities learned. Next slide, please. And we have a range of resources and support for that, like the International Charter for Walking. It's critical to collect data, map the walkability, and then invest and evaluate the impact of the programs. Next slide, please. And this is what I wanted to invite Moscow to join us on our Pathways to Walkable Cities, which we'll be launching in the fall this year. I don't know that I've geographically got it in the right place, but it's there marked up on the map. And we are going to be showcasing cities from all over the world and what they've done for walking and walkability and how their programs have improved not just how the streets look, but how people experience and enjoy walking as well. Final slide, please. So thank you so much for having me. Albeit I'm not in Moscow, I have enjoyed exploring your streets through the online opportunities I have. And I invite you to join us in the Walk 21 network, and let's move Moscow's story into those Walk 21 conversations and join us. We have a conference each year. It's in Dublin next year. We look forward to hearing much more about walking and walkability in Moscow. Thank you very much.
Bronwen, спасибо большое за эту лекцию. Очень сильно надеюсь, что Москва...
Thank you very much for this lecture. I'm really hopeful that Moscow will join this program and there will be something to tell you about at this conference. Over the recent 10 years, we did have a revolution in this regards. We do a lot of efforts to make sure there is more pedestrian experience. We make roads more narrow, we increase pedestrian pathways, public spaces are becoming larger. Now we have more and more individual transportations, including bicycles. Recently, it was incredibly hot in Moscow. It was around 36 degrees, 37 degrees at the sun. and some other cities on the planet live like this most part of the year. Or other towns have incredibly low temperatures. For example, our towns in the northern part of Russia. Did you have experience working with towns in extreme climate conditions? And how do you work with pedestrians in this case? How do you increase pedestrian activity in these cases?
Thank you very much. That's a great question because it's one we get all the time when people say it's too cold or it's too hot, it's too sweaty. There's lots of reasons, but at the end of the day, we have to enable people to continue walking. We can accept that people aren't going to walk all the time or everywhere, but in hot climates, they build shade, they build trees. Creating cooler environments in hot cities is not just about putting things in. A lot of cities are doing misters or planting trees, but we do need to reduce the impact of motorization because actually the vehicles moving in those spaces also add to the heat factor that people experience in their immediate environment. So we can create cool corridors, or Vienna has a program called Cool Streets, and you can create those opportunities where it's nicer for people to walk. And in cold countries, in snow countries, we've done a lot of work in Canada. Clearing the snow is critical because people will go out. Across Scandinavia, they have some of the highest physical activity levels. People will still choose to go out, but we need to make sure it's still comfortable and attractive for them. So we need to clear the snow off the footpaths. We need to prioritize footpath snow clearing around schools and where we want people to walk the most in access to the metro stations. So we need to manage those conditions, and we need to be honest about what the best opportunity and manage expectations. We don't want everybody 100% of the time in the dead of winter walking, but we should still be making it safe and attractive for them to do so.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much.
У меня есть, наверное, еще один вопрос.
I have one more question. Since we're in line with our schedule, we have 2 more minutes.
В каких частях города не стоит провоцировать, стимулировать?
In what parts of cities, under what conditions should we not encourage walking? I guess not all parts of towns should be walkable. Is it so?
Well, nobody has ever asked me that question before, because I would argue that actually we should ensure people can move safely in their cities, in any part of the city, because people do. And if we make it unsafe for people to walk there, then it will be worse for the people who have no choice but to walk in those cities. I mean, inevitably, I'm not talking about train lines and I'm not talking about freeways, but we really must rethink the idea that there won't be people walking there or that we should build people out. We need to build in safety, we need to build in walkability, and we need to start on every street and imagine that people would be there. And I know in many cities around the world they like to think that they can put barriers down the middle of a road so that people don't cross but use overpasses and things like that, but people still cross over at street level and climb over those barriers, which makes it less safe for everybody, including the people in the cars. So we shouldn't actually imagine that we can fence areas off that say this is not walkable, we don't need to spend time here, but actually how do we ensure the safety of everybody who may or may not be moving in that space. And again, there can be certain areas, just as we would prioritize pedestrian zones where there's lots of pedestrians, like in a shopping street or somewhere like that, where we take the cars out altogether. That's logical. In high-speed motorways, we wouldn't want people there either. But maybe in heavy freight movements and things, we wouldn't want a lot of people walking around. But it's not, you can't start with thinking that we're going to fence zones off. You start with thinking people are always going to want to move and access different parts of the cities, and we should enable that. And the critical thing at the moment as well, with the shifting dynamics at response to COVID, is that more and more people are working from home. Journeys are changing. People won't be commuting into cities quite as much. That sort of business center focus is shifting, and we need to ensure that people's local neighborhoods are attractive and walkable so that they can sustain their physical activity and the mental health benefits and well-being of getting out and about on their local streets. So we need almost everywhere to be walkable.
Прекрасное окончание наше.
That's a wonderful ending of our dialogue. Thank you very much. I really hope to see you in Moscow sometime very soon.
Thank you. It's been lovely to visit you virtually. Thank you.
С нами была Бронwen Thornton.
That was Bronwen Thornton, the founder of Walk21.
Мы узнали о том, что людям нужно гулять.
And we learned that people need to walk everywhere. Thank you very much and goodbye.